Please do make sure to help us subscribe and hit that notification bell. The sound of the prison gates clanging shut is something you never forget. Cold iron, heavy, final, like the world deciding you don't belong to it anymore. I was minutes away from death. The crowd outside screamed for blood. The guards treated me like I was already gone. My life flashed before my eyes, not the glamorous parts, because there weren't many, but the faces of 3 little children I had taken in when no one else wanted them. 3 abandoned souls. I raised them as if they were my own, poured every bit of love, sweat, and sacrifice into keeping them alive. And now, 25 years later, when the world had turned its back on me, when the judge signed my death warrant with ink as black as my fate, one of them stepped forward and stopped my execution. But before I tell you what happened that night, and why my life was dangling on the edge of a rope, you need to know where it all began. My name is Jessica. I wasn't wealthy, I wasn't powerful, and at the time, I wasn't even sure I wanted to live myself. The year was harsh, the kind that swallowed people whole. I was working late shifts at a rundown diner, barely affording rent on a one-room shack, when fate intervened. It was a stormy night. Rain came down like nails on the tin roof of the diner, thunder splitting the sky into halves. On my way home, I passed the alley behind the old church. That's when I heard it, faint cries, muffled sobs cutting through the storm. I stopped. My shoes were soaked, my bones shivered, but the sound anchored me. I turned toward the shadows and found them. 3 children, huddled together under a piece of cardboard. A girl no older than 7, clutching a baby swaddled in rags, and a boy, perhaps 5, trying to shield them both from the downpour with his tiny arms. Their eyes met mine, wide, hollow, terrified. No one else was there. No parent, no soul. Just me. I remember whispering to myself, if I walk away now, they'll die. And something inside me, something fierce and unstoppable, refused to let that happen. So I gathered them into my arms, all 3, and carried them home. What I didn't know then was that saving them would be the very reason my own life would one day hang in the balance. Raising 3 abandoned children in poverty wasn't a noble story of warmth and laughter. It was hunger gnawing at our bellies, it was sickness creeping in during winter nights when I couldn't afford medicine. But still, I fought. The girl, Bella, learned quickly how to cook whatever scraps I could bring home from the diner. The boy, Samuel, developed a quiet strength. He carried buckets of water from the well when my back gave out. And the baby, John, grew up with the biggest eyes that studied me as if I were both his savior and his curse. People whispered, "Those aren't her children." Some called me a fool, others spat cruel names, accusing me of stealing or worse. But I ignored them. What mattered was survival. Yet, deep down, I sensed a shadow circling us. Something unspoken. Something tied to where those children came from. And one night, it found us. The knock at the door was slow, deliberate. Midnight. My stomach twisted with dread. When I opened it, a man stood there, soaked in rain, his eyes bloodshot. "They're mine," he rasped. "The children. You've taken what belongs to me." I froze. The children were asleep in the corner, curled together like kittens. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, heart pounding. But the man's gaze lingered on the baby, John. His lips twisted into a smirk. "That one, he's worth more than you can imagine. Hand him over, and I'll forget the rest." Panic surged through me. Worth? What did he mean? I slammed the door, bolted it, and pressed my back against the wood, shaking. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, the man was gone, but a message had been carved into the dirt outside our shack. "You can't keep them forever." From that day forward, we lived not just in hunger, but in fear. Time passed, and I built walls, not of brick, but of silence and secrecy. I never told the children about the man. I never let them walk alone. And as they grew, I worked myself to the bone, taking every shift I could find. Bella became a bright student, always scribbling in notebooks. Samuel grew strong, his shoulders hard from labor. John, the youngest, had a mind sharper than any I'd seen. He would ask questions no child should ask. Why don't we have a father? Why do people look at us like we don't belong? Why do you never smile, Mama? I brushed his questions aside, but deep down, I feared the answers. Because I knew one day, the past would come knocking again. And when it did, it wouldn't just ask questions. It would demand blood. 20 years slipped by. The children were no longer children. Bella became a teacher, pouring her heart into classrooms filled with kids who reminded her of herself. Samuel worked at the docks, his back bent but unbroken. John, oh, John, he became a lawyer, sharp-tongued and sharper-minded. He always said he wanted to fight for people like me. But shadows don't stay buried forever. One cold evening, I found a letter slipped under my door. No address. No stamp. Just 5 words in crooked handwriting. The debt is not paid. My hands shook as I read it. After all these years, he had found us again. I burned the letter in the stove, but the smoke didn't take away my fear. I knew what it meant, something was coming. And I was right. It was a Sunday morning. I was peeling potatoes for soup when the sirens cut through the air. Police cars swarmed my yard. Neighbors gathered, whispering, watching as officers poured into my home. I didn't resist when they cuffed my wrists. What is this about? Bella cried, tears streaking her face. The officer's voice was flat. Murder. The world tilted. My ears rang. Murder. Me. They dragged me into the car. The last thing I saw was John standing frozen on the porch, his fists clenched, his eyes stormy with something I couldn't read. But deep down, I knew. This was the shadow's work. The man from the past hadn't just returned. He had planted something, lies, evidence, maybe worse. And now, my children would watch me be destroyed. Courtrooms are colder than prisons. Every day, I sat there as the prosecutor painted me as a monster. A woman who lured men, used children as pawns, and murdered for money. They said I killed the man who once knocked on my door 25 years ago. They said I buried secrets beneath my floorboards. I denied it all, but my voice was drowned in the tide of lies. The jury's eyes turned hard. Even my neighbors sat in silence, believing the worst. But not my children. I saw Bella's hands trembling in her lap, Samuel's jaw locked in fury, and John was taking notes furiously, his eyes darting from the prosecutor to me. It was John the first feared for the most. Because I saw in his face the same smirk that stranger once wore. Had the shadow gotten to him too? The cell was small. The walls were damp. I had made peace with death. I wasn't afraid for myself anymore, but for my children. Because if the shadow had truly won, their lives would be chained to lies forever. The day came. They led me down the long hallway, every step echoing like a drumbeat of doom. The guards wouldn't meet my eyes. And then, just as the warden raised his hand to give the signal, a voice cut through the air. Stop. It was John. My John. He burst into the chamber, papers clutched in his hand, his face pale but blazing with fire. She didn't kill him, he shouted. Because he wasn't murdered. He's alive. The room erupted. My knees buckled. Alive. After all these years. The courtroom gasped when John dropped the bombshell. Alive. The word thundered in my skull. For 25 years, I'd lived under the shadow of a ghost. And now John was saying he still breathed. The warden froze. The judge demanded order. And John, my boy, raised the stack of papers like a shield. This, he said, voice steady but charged, is proof. Witness statements. Financial records. Surveillance photos. The man everyone claims my mother murdered. He faked his own death. He framed her to cover his crimes. The prosecutor sputtered, face red. That's absurd. Where is this man then? John turned, his voice like iron. Closer than you think. And then, from the back of the courtroom, came the creak of a door. A figure stepped inside. The same eyes. The same cruel smirk. The man who had haunted me for decades. Alive. Gasps filled the room. My hands shook against the chains. He looked older, gaunt, but still carried himself like a man who thought the world belonged to him. His voice dripped poison. You never learned your place, Jessica, he sneered. You were supposed to stay broken. But you took them in. You raised them. And look, his eyes flicked to John, you raised one smart enough to find me. My children stood. Bella clutched Samuel's arm, her body trembling, but John never moved. His eyes were locked on the man, steady and unflinching. This ends today, John said coldly. The courtroom erupted as evidence was laid bare, forged death certificates, false testimonies, bank accounts he drained while the world thought him buried. The very foundation of the case against me cracked, splintered, then shattered. For the first time in decades, I could breathe. But the relief was sharp and fleeting. Because I knew, men like him didn't just walk away. He would strike again. When the verdict came, I was free. But freedom didn't feel like victory. Not yet. That night, I sat with John by the fire. The house was quiet, Bella and Samuel already asleep. My son leaned forward, his face lit by the flames. You know, he said softly, I didn't just save you today. I wanted him to see that he lost. My throat tightened. And what if he tries again? John's eyes darkened. Then I'll be ready. This time, he won't disappear into the shadows. He'll stay buried. The words chilled me. Because in John's voice, I heard something I hadn't expected, vengeance. My boy, the one I raised to be kind, now carried fire I had kept hidden in my own heart. And maybe that was the real inheritance I had passed down. Weeks later, I returned to my old home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard where I once held my children's hands. I thought it was over. Until I found another letter waiting for me on the porch. The same crooked handwriting. You may have one today, but you can't hide forever. My breath caught. My hands trembled. And yet, I smiled. Because this time, I wasn't alone. Jessica walked away vengeful but victorious, not because the shadows vanished, but because her children stood in the light with her. What once nearly destroyed her became the very bond that saved her. Watch out for Part 2.